the moments where you're fully involved, as fully as that moment allows, let's say. The more you carry it with you, or it's carrying forward.
Welcome to the podcast The Embodiment Talks, a podcast by the Embodiment Lab with Marion van Opijnen. Taking your role as change agent of societal or education systems requires vision and courage. This podcast will help you take this pioneer's role with more body awareness and confidence, without losing sight of the connection with others. We dive into how we as humans are hardwired, how systems change works, and how both are related. I will take you on my own quest, and I will share background information, talk to experts, and share exercises. We will think, feel, and act. Great that you're here, and happy listening. Here we are today, and today I'm interviewing Luuk Huijgen. And Luuk is lecturer at the Education and Learning Sciences Department of the Wageningen University. And I invited him for this interview because I've been teaching together with him and I'm really inspired by his way of teaching. And that's also what we are going to talk about today. And I think where we meet in this is that we both very trying to involve the whole human into studying instead of just making it like a more cognitive exercise.
Yeah.
And so that's what we are going to talk about. Would you like to say more about who you are, or just very short?
Sure.
Not a full life history, but just in short to add something to what I've just said.
Sure. I'm a skills trainer here at Wageningen University for the last 7 years or so. And I have a background in earth sciences and forest and nature conservation. So focusing a lot on sustainability in that part of my background. I became more and more interested in education because I've been working with forest and nature conservation in the sense of analyzing, seeing the problems, looking at the solutions, but it's such an intricate and complex issue that more and more I thought, well, it's really so much about the first steps you're making in this world and how you relate to this world that already in the education it feels that there you make very important steps. So I became very interested in education and the role of education. I was already doing something with education. I like to do it myself, working with people, being in interaction. So that was the first step, and then I here became a skills trainer, and later on this was combined in a focus on sustainability, competences, or skills or capacities, however you want to name it, and that's still what I do mostly. Next to this, I'm also a coach and a personal development trainer, so this is also an area. But today more in the sustainability.
And a personal development within university, like for students.
Yeah, exactly. Mostly for master students.
Mostly master students.
Yeah. From all different fields of study.
Yeah. And what was it in your own life? What was for you like one of those pivotal points where you thought like, I need to make that shift from earth sciences and more the scientific perspective to things to involving the whole human being. So what was for you the insight? I need to make this link.
I don't know if there was any specific moment. I think it gradually grew on, towards the perspective I had. I think a lot had to do with my own experiences of having certain feelings in nature, being there, but also working in sort of contexts where you're not in this classroom, but you're outside with students working, doing field work, where also people are involved. So my master thesis was one important period of time where I've been working on honeybush in South Africa. So it's a tea herbal infusion related to the rooibos, which is more famous, but it can only, they didn't know, I actually don't know the current status, but they didn't know how to cultivate it, or that was unsuccessful. So we looked into this, and mostly, you know, what was the way they were harvesting, what were the basic practices, and they didn't actually know. But while working there on also the ecological side, and looking into, okay, how does this plant grow, you know, what are the conditions they need, we saw that it had so much to do with the connection between all those farmers, not really communicating with each other. So the building of a community felt very important in that regard. So that was one period in which I noticed, okay, this is really also about the human interaction and their personal development. How would you call it? Development of people.
Or even community development, actually.
Community development, well. Definitely.
Yeah.
And on education, it was in different moments, I would say, during my studies, where I also did courses on environment education, nature education. Also my own learning process, I would say, where did I learn most? That was always when there was this experiential part in there, but also when I was sort of developing, doing stuff instead of just learning by mind, and I also changed more in my experiences when I was traveling, for example, or when I was in contact with people from different cultures here at Wageningen. But there was not really one specific moment, I would say.
But it what I do hear in what you say is it's also about reflecting on where did I actually really learn, and I really learned things when there was more involved of me as a human being than just reading books and going to lectures and just listening to what my teacher has to tell me.
Yeah, and I think I don't know what I now tend to see with students and how we set up courses. A lot of people can relate to this. You know, the moments where you're fully involved, as fully as that moment allows, let's say. The more you carry it with you, or it's carrying forward, you know, into whatever you will be doing. The moments where you're fully involved, as fully as that moment allows, let's say. The more you carry it with you, or it's carrying forward, you think it through beforehand. So it's a lot about allowing openings, or allowing the space for such moments or such pedagogical spaces to arise. So it's also a lot of not designing, but, you know, or designing openness, which comes from, first of all, being open and being diverse in the settings you're educating in. So a diversity between sometimes lecturing, but sometimes also really going outside of classroom. A lot of interaction with each other, I would say. A lot of interaction, not on a specific task necessarily, but an interaction between people and between views of people, and between and sharing or exchanging experiences in this in this specific domain. There are different, I would say, different also methods you could use. Art-based methods are an important one. Dialogues are an important one. But in general, these are just tools to use it, and I think that the main challenge, but also the beautiful opportunity, is to create this space, this pedagogical space, or this conversation space, this exchange, interactional space where you can allow that. But that's quite, I find it always a very challenging thing to do, because you don't have so much to hold on to.
No, exactly. That's what I wanted to ask actually, because that's probably also why we hold on to theory and teaching concepts, because it's kind of safe as well. I have this knowledge and I'm going to transfer this knowledge to other people.
Yeah.
And that's what science is based upon. You know, if it's repetitive, then it's science, and we can prove that something works in a certain way.
Yeah.
But if you create an open space, it although there is a kind of a framework from which to depart, and there's the title to the course, so there is some direction, but that's about it.
Yeah.
So creating an open space is can be quite a challenge.
It is very much a challenge.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes you just have the practical restrictions like time, for preparation, but I think it's mainly a challenge to approach it as a teacher. At least for me, I always see it as my challenge to approach it as a teacher in a sort of similar openness, and also being a learner. Of course, I'm sort of the orchestrator in some ways. It's needed to give a little bit of structure and that the whole thing keeps moving in a certain direction with enough clarity. But on the other side, I'm just as much a learner as the students themselves in many ways, and to be open to what arises, and being there also trying to attune to the whole situation, so trying to feel and sense what is happening and what is really in a conversation, the part where things start moving or happening, or you see people emotionally reacting, and you see people getting more into it, more interested, also by bodily expression. And I think that always remains a challenge to stay open as much as you possibly can. Of course, you take some perspectives also with you. These are valuable.
And what I find a challenge in that myself as well is that, and you also teach on subjects, or like if we talk about systems thinking or more the transformative side, that we as a society we're moving somewhere that we actually don't know. And as we all grew up in that strict educational system, which is all prescribed on what we are going to learn, there's a lot out there which comes with the transformation that we actually don't know. And what I find a challenge to get people or students to move into that space, and to ask the questions that they do not take for granted. So they ask to the new, and how do you create that space that students start asking for the new, because it's so difficult to ask for the things that you actually don't know, because we don't know that it's there. So how can I ask for it? So so how do you deal with that, getting students from the space that they know and that they grow up in and what they're taught, towards the space where there's something emergent that nobody of us already knows?
It's finding the right questions that naturally lead to, without me doing it, but them having conversations that naturally lead to the sense that there are always the multiple angles towards those kind of problems and those uncertainties. But it's shaping questions that spark interesting conversations, which eventually lead to, wow, this is kind of messy, complicated, and we don't know. And often that leaves them a little bit disillusioned and okay, and wow, now what? What are we going to do? And then providing, because there's always for me the balance between not knowing and leaving it all open, but also with the chance of becoming too fluid in a sense. I think we as humans, but life in general, needs also structure, and there are also things we do can rely on or can be guided by or have a value, maybe not that we know in the sense of a truth, but that are principles that are working. So turn again to those principles first, sort of removing a lot of ground where they can stand on and what is I know that, removing that, and then saying, okay, but which procedures, principles can we apply as also experimenting to take next steps, because that is life in a sense as well, to keep moving. I mean, it is moving, so there's no way. So it's more of a question, how do you keep moving and not taking action and falling back on the same principles that you've always been doing and inherited and are in a sense maybe quite conservative towards some of the situations that we're living now in with regards to the sustainability problem. To sort of look at these rigorously and finding a balance in, okay, how can we move forward?
So that actually also means that you have to somehow contain that space of those students being in that space, like, okay, and now what?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
which they don't like probably to be in that space. They rather also get maybe
some a few do.
Yeah.
Most find it uncomfortable or just outright very uncomfortable and don't want to be there.
Yeah.
Sort of sometimes they sort of know what they sign up for, of course, with the course description, etc. So I think there is a small bias there always, which gives for maybe a few students not, but for far most opportunity to go in that direction. Enough space to open those new dimensions. There's always this balance between providing enough support and on the otherwise openness, and that means that as a teacher you also have to try to develop this, I think, capacity to be okay with the space and still knowing that there is a way to move forward, or having a sense of this, having a trust in the way of moving forward. Or you can also do this, of course, in sort of in partnership with different people, that one person who's maybe better in really opening the space just removes all ground, and then the next one who is well connected to that teacher says, okay, but these steps we can take forward. So for me it's always this and this, and it often also leads to paradoxes, which I find intriguing. We don't know, but we have to know in a sense, or at least it's all uncertain and open, but at the same time we need to make decisions, and these places of friction, and sometimes just sort of almost the different polarities in there.
Yeah.
These are interesting spaces, I find, and not to resolve actually.
Yeah.
It's this and this.
Yeah, and it indeed, because what you say, we need to take decisions, but it also is how fixed are the decisions that we take.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the best decision that we take now, but to know that as soon as there's more information or it doesn't work anymore, to be flexible, because otherwise we're just living in a kind of an anarchy, like, okay, everything can happen, and it doesn't really matter. So it is creating actually like a kind of a flexible structure.
Yeah.
Because we do need structure, and nature, even how chaotic it sometimes may seem, there's always an underlying structure there as well. It's just not the efficient structure that we tend to look for.
Yeah, and that ties into, I would say, also the evaluating part. Do you take time to deeply evaluate the most important steps in such decisions, and also are you discernful enough? Are we discernful enough? It's a question for ourselves, of course, to know when it's just about, it doesn't really matter which path you take, but you need to step into one, okay, quick action. But and what are moments where you really need to evaluate deeply, how did this process go? Are we on the right track? Do we need to, change a little bit of the direction we take? And that also applies for education itself. How do we evaluate that, and at which moments, and what are the most important parts in there, and especially being involved in sustainability education and capacities. there's a lot of uncertain ground, or in between ground, where it's not only about, and this is, I think, an important perspective for me, it's not only about the technical or technocratic or instrumental or objective way of resolving the problems we have, but also about the human side, the societal side, the subjective part in there. And with subjective, I mean you as a person, what you carry along, not necessarily a opinion, but personhood, let's say. And combining those, or staying in the middle, that's not easy to evaluate as well. So how do we evaluate both sides at the same time? The results, the knowledge they take away, which is also important. I mean, I'm definitely an advocate of science as well, but not relying on this. What we said earlier, to rely on all the things and the methods we have of science is an easy step there. Well, I prefer the view of science being a tool being used, but that means it's not necessarily the starting ground. You take the whole and everything as starting ground, and you use science at the right moments in the right way, which is it's a skill itself, I think. And, even here at the university, not easy to develop on high levels, knowing how to use science in those societal complex situations and issues.
Yeah. And have you done an attempt to kind of get that more scientific?
The whole way of
the way, the bringing more the social and the complexity into science, or also into education. What I find myself as well is like with the whole accreditation system, which is very rigid and which is very much focused on learning outcomes, and everything needs to fit together, and it needs to be tested and evaluated, and so yeah, it is science, but it's the whole system around it as well, on how we accredit scientific institutions, or universities for applied sciences as well, and any school actually, they're all bound to that accreditation system. So how was your attempt to get a more social and complexity into those structures?
I would say there are different ways to do it. I think it's not easy, because the system is indeed structured in favor of one of the sides. I think, and I also always saw this when I was doing more a focus on nature education and looking in how can you bring this into the curriculum. It's mostly the creativity and the flexibility of the teachers themselves that really make a difference in the way you educate. So the small moments where you do a small assignment which have a really different taste, let's say, than the main part which we are fixed to, and that is not that's not easily changed, because we need, of course, also to be able to go with this society, with their tests, and being able to sustain ourselves. That means also to earn our money and be a professional. But in those in between moments, you can do still a lot which make an impression. You don't need necessarily a lot of time to make a strong impression. You need the right moments and the right again, I would say, approach or feeling towards it to really make people see the contrast between the two. So also for me as a teacher, it's in those smaller moments where you just do a different assignment, where you have a conversation, or you ask I have a plenary conversation and I ask a specific question, and I go more into the direction of, okay, but what are the assumptions, what are your views that you take there? What was an experience that shaped those views you have, or orientation you have? I like the word orientation a bit better than views, because I think views is a bit cognitive in a sense, and I'm approaching it from the whole. It's both about the experiential bodily as well as the thinking cognitive stuff. So what is your orientation towards, and how has this been shaped? But you only need sometimes small moments. Of course, I would like to have much more space, so that's not easy. In some themes we have more space, so talking about sustainability education itself, and we're going to teach a course on this in the coming weeks. Well, it is an important part of sustainability education, also the subjectification, what they also call, or the personal view and what you bring into this education yourself. So we have more space there to also work with reflective assignments that last long, or whether it's really time to reflect, where we go out into nature and not in nature to learn about nature, but to be in nature and just feel surrounded by nature, and then do the reflective assignment about the course. So it's not about teaching about nature, it is being in nature, feeling it, and doing some exercises to tune a little bit more towards the surrounding where we are. And once we feel this, that can differ per person how strong this is. Some people really feel like, oh, I'm part of it, and other people think, oh, this is just a nice place to be in when it's sunny weather. But that both makes a difference in how they reflect on what does it mean to educate around sustainability. So all these differences between what kind of course do you have and what are the small moments that you could use them. But you need to have the resources and space yourself to step into those. I think that's maybe even the main challenge, that we have to be so caught up by everything we have to do and the procedures and the pressure, that for ourselves there's not so much space anymore to be guided by this creativity or intuition about, okay, this is a nice moment to just to create this contrast, slow down, give it another feeling, less task oriented but more openness, and then shift again. And for me, it's a lot about the balance and the diversity I'm working with.
And how do you create that space for yourself?
To reduce, I'm evaluated as a teacher also by the students and how they learn and how they perceive the course. And I think, again, that I have the advantage that I don't teach very, very informational heavy courses where they need to remember everything. So my courses are more about the development of practices, of habits, of understanding on a little bit more metacognitive level, I would say. So in this evaluation, I rely on the fact that I have my basic building blocks, which are most important. These are covered. In this sense, I also cover the most important parts of the system which we need to do. And by focusing enough attention, but leaving them a little bit more as basic building blocks, openness, not trying to add too much detail in those elements. For example, if we teach a course about sustainability education and the history of sustainability education, we could teach a week long of facts, etc., etc. But relying there a little bit more on the general trends, and saying, okay, these are the principles in this period of time, these are the principles. You create a little bit more just time and space there to jump into whatever happens, but also in my own preparation, it leaves me with less work necessary to work out all the details and to remember the whole story myself. And so it's keeping it simple. That's maybe as simple as possible as the system allows. At the same time, some parts of the system I also, of course, find very important in my education. So there's definitely not a conflict often between what the system needs and what I need to do. Mostly I would say in assessment. It's sometimes the most difficult part, the most challenging part.
Yeah, because how do you assess a reflective journal of a student?
Yeah, and in a few of the courses that's even artistic expression.
Yeah.
So how do you assess this? So they need to, of course, write some words, because otherwise we have too little tools to interpret it right in the way that we need to assess.
Yeah, which is also kind of weird. I had one assignment that students could vlog or blog. They could choose their own topic and they could make a vlog or a blog or a poem or a cartoon or what have you about it. And I had that student writing a beautiful poem, and it really touched me, and I got tears in my eyes when I read it. And I thought, if you can kind of bring the material together in a poem, you really know what it is about. You really embody like what you actually want to say. And from my perspective, that's much more powerful than just writing a blog or writing an assignment about it. And it's very difficult to evaluate.
Yeah.
Because how do I evaluate a poem that really touches me?
Yeah. No, it's extremely difficult, and we had those examples as well of I think 2 years ago we had a student that did a dance performance and taped this, and then wrote some extra words about her change in perspectives around sustainability education, which was really powerful in a sense. And what we at least, because it's not an easy thing, of course, because what touches you might also be a personal resonance of something you're sensitive to. But at least we do this with all the teachers and get some sort of cross-checking going on between, how do you do. And then there is a little bit more liability. Then we add they need to add some reflective notes, where they specifically relate to some course aspects or principles. And there in combination, you can see how the links are correctly used, yes or no, how deeply the understanding is. But it remains difficult.
Yeah.
And so also the rubrics are more less detailed in a way, and less criteria, and the grading is a little bit more, how do you say, this best coarsely, but you get less. The difference between 7.5 and 7.7 is not. We don't want to estimate this as well. No. So it's more a difference between 5, 6, or 7, 8, let's say, and that is what is justifiable in the way we grade this. So it's a combination of all elements without losing, because also the students give back that it's super. It was super valuable, and they find it very inspiring to see each other's examples, to do such a reflection and to express them in this way about the dimension, which is not only about information and technical elements. So also for the learning process, you want to keep this, and apparently it's with all the teachers there, it's with multiple students there, so there is something in there enough for us, and it also relates to the course content. So that gives us enough confidence that it's worthwhile and justifiable to do so. And then again, it's what measures do you need to take to make it more reliable as a means of evaluation, which also is enough reliable in the eyes of, let's say, the administrators of this university.
And now we've spoken about how to design more creative education processes where students are not just working in a cognitive level, but also at a more emotional and embodied level. Why is that for you, or why do you think that is important, that we teach students in that way? For sustainability or for the society? What does society gain from this?
Yeah, or the question would be, what do you lose by only looking at the technical elements or the objective elements again?
And so we can answer both probably.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm often a little bit more fan, I would say, of denormalizing the current way to just create openness for new strategies than one of my methodological teachers would say puffing up the alternative. Which is not to say that you can explain why there's strength in a certain aspect like emotional or bodily elements in learning. I would say, well, very simply, I just see much more results when all are combined. And I see more results in how people are moved, are touched, but also in the way they phrase their shifts in perspectives, but also if I'm working in a much more real life context with students on a sustainability challenge that they gained or that they got from society. We have a few courses where they work with real life solutions. I would say the effectiveness just becomes much stronger. So also the solutions, I think, become much stronger if you have human and so, well, I should distinguish there, but the human feeling element, information in there, dimension in there, and the more distance analytical objective element. I think really where both worlds, I would say, not meet but play, and are interacting. This is where I see most change and most effect. And I see solutions that are much more fitted for the specific context they're working. I see solutions that are much more intuitive for the people that are asking the students to do such an assignment. I see solutions that are more creative often, but still rigorous and still touching up on the important analytical components as well. So in a sense that feels for me much more balanced.
Yeah, I like that how you say like that they kind of play together. Because what I often see is now we go either one direction, we either go in a more cognitive direction or we go in a more personal, creative direction, and to kind of have that play together. Yeah. It also, what I also hear in what you say is that it gives a certain allowance, or to allow the students to look at assignments in a more creative way, and to give them that space to come up with solutions that may not be in the books, but they may need their knowledge from the books to come up with those solutions, because we're not starting from scratch. Yeah. And there's a lot of valuable knowledge out there that we can use. Yeah. But if we fix it or if we make it rigid, then it doesn't serve us anymore. Yeah.
No, and I definitely also come across students that prefer sort of the openness and the more creative way, but they immediately step into all of it and sort of almost forget the critical view or the more analytical methodologies, which also really have their strength, and then it also doesn't become a very strong solution in my eyes. It's a very fun, often way, but it sometimes just doesn't touch the real issue, for example, or it doesn't distinguish between several elements very strong. So also there, and it's nice to, so I both like the dimensions of looking within this play, within someone, within an individual, and also the liminal space there, so the space between how do you shift from your feeling side to your more analytical side, but also between different people that have a stronger tendency or an easier entrance in some situations towards the feeling side. And this can also again shift, because someone can feel very strongly in a specific topic and situation, but in another one, the other one can feel stronger, you know. So also this group dynamic I find very intriguing as a trainer.
So it also requires training the consciousness on where am I caught up in.
Yeah.
So if I get so enthusiastic about that creative process and I just start making huge creative things, and then I come back and think like, oh, but how is it related to reality or to this assignment?
Yeah.
Or being completely caught up in trying to find more information and to get more knowledge and not being in touch with how it feels or what the effect on me as a person or on the community is. So that requires consciousness as well to see like, okay, where am I at this moment?
Yeah, and I think that is maybe even the most important learning process for me to facilitate as a teacher, trainer. This is where I think the shaping role comes of a teacher for me. It's I don't see a future of education where everyone can follow their full personal path and do it in the way they like, because I think there's a role for a teacher to turn us towards certain aspect, not to say, okay, you should learn this or that, but turn someone a little bit into a direction, like, oh, this perspective is there as well, and this element is also important, because we need each other, and I need the different sorts of students that I have to actually show the examples, because I can't embody all the examples myself as well. I'm also limited in what I can embody or show. But I think it is my task to again, as good as I can, facilitate this process of, hey, look, this student does it in this way, and this student in this way, and there are strength in there and a strength there, and it's about this process of interaction and meeting in the middle and moving through the middle, where the most integral or holistic education takes place as well.
So it's actually the class is a system in itself, and it's complex in itself, and is the closest learning example.
The closest
learning example as the system of the class itself, where you have all the different perspectives and where there's no right or wrong, but there is listening to the different perspectives and trying to understand those different perspectives, and then to come up like with what is it that we want as a community, or what is it that I want as an individual. And what is my role in this system as well.
And then every now and then where I see an opportunity, I will try to bring in perspective which is still absent, and often more because I know it as a critical view of it, or I have encountered it, but again, not because I can embody it, but for example from an outside academia perspective, which is very important in societal questions like sustainability. Or a perspective that I've seen in students that are not in that class specifically, but I've seen in other classes, or that I can just embody myself because I am different than the students that are there. Sometimes older, just because you're 10 years older, you have a few different perspectives again, or you have a different background. So.
And that's also what we spoke about before, and that's that space of what we don't know yet, or what is still emerging, and you have some perspectives on that, and maybe some other people have some perspectives as well. So we need that systemic view on that space to see what's all possible there, and what.
And it's always new and it's never complete.
No.
And also this sort of limitation, like the certainty or uncertainty is. In a sense, you could say a limitation. You could also see it as an opportunity, or just as the way it is. But also the fact that you never can bring all views is something to accept or to work with, and actually both at the same time. Because that also, for me, gives the approach of a new class, a fully new situation, because I have again all unique human beings there, including myself, which have changed because I did the previous class as well. And these are nuances, but important nuances, and at the same time you have the general building blocks that stay rather stable throughout years or the course in students, in persons, in humans.
Yeah, and that's the where you started with, like, the questions to ask to stimulate them to look in the corners they haven't looked in yet.
Yeah.
And that is kind of the building blocks. But what is coming out of that, what's going to emerge, is different.
Yeah.
Every class,
yeah.
every system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not that different that it's always a radical new perspective, but that's also not the difference that I'm looking for. You know, I think in small differences there can be important changes, let's say, and it's not the whole class eureka moment that it's not a realistic view of life in my perspective. And at the same time, important changes in perspective can be changed or are changed throughout life. And of course, from an educational view, maybe most grossly when you're between 7 and 10 in your formative years, which is then, okay, 7 and 10 is a very restricted time limited, and this is exactly the science where I think we have to be careful with. But I found it very plausible that in those years, a lot of the patterns and views are more dominantly shaped. But that doesn't mean that from that starting point, throughout subtle changes, important difference in habits or interactions or in the way you just deal with what you bring in or your own patterns can be changed. And that makes, I think, if all people do that, that makes a huge change in how we shape the world.
Yeah. So you're planting your seeds.
I'm planting my seeds.
Yeah, in the students, like with just bringing some small nuances or some small changes to, or things to think about for students to, that can then start
I don't know,
growing or not.
I think
that's also, it doesn't grow at all students.
No, certainly not. No, exactly. No, and I would say, you know, they bring their own seeds because you can only bring your own seeds. Yeah. Or I maybe, or I shine a little sun on them, or I water them, and some, the sun is not at the right moment, and they won't germinate, and others they already have enough water and they don't need water. So, but I do try to create a diverse and colorful, flowery meadow, let's say, as a sort of image. Okay. And I think in this, if you make this ecological metaphor, I think the system works better if there's diversity in there, and I think people work better when it's, in a sense, feeling good, as maybe in this analogy, aesthetically pleasing. You know, when you have this colorful one, this is a complete and good feeling for a lot of humans, and that is important to work with. You know, you need to. Then we're more addressed, I think, and with being content, we also have a clearer view sometimes.
Great. I think that's a great ending to this conversation. Kind of. Exactly. Is there something that you feel like, I really missed out of saying this, so I have to add that, or is there still something?
Not directly something that pop-ups in my mind.
No. Okay. Great. If people are really interested, is there any way on how they can reach you? Through the WUR website? Through the
WUR website is, I think, the best way.
Yeah. I will put your link in the show notes.
Lovely.
Thank you. Thanks, really nice to kind of elaborate on what we of course did already before we were co-teaching and so on, but it's nice to kind of see, to bring it together in like 40 minutes of talk and
again,
to elaborate on it.
Form than co-teaching, which is also a lovely new situation.
And nice phrases which make me think again as well, and so thank you for that, and I really enjoyed it.
Same here.
And see you at the next colleague encounter.
Very soon.
Great that you listened to this episode of the Embodiment Talks. Please let me know your thoughts about this episode or the insights that you gained. Email me to the address in the show notes. If you want to get in touch with me, or if you have a question or topic that you want to know more about, don't hesitate to send me an email as well. Do you want to be kept up to date? Like this podcast in your favorite podcast app. You can help me by giving a thumbs up or leaving a comment so that this podcast will reach more people. You can find more information about my work on my website www.embodimentlab.nl or my YouTube channel Embodiment Lab. Thanks for listening and meet you at the next episode.